The green room was quieter than usual. The air conditioning hummed, but the real chill came from the unease that seemed to hang in the space. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, sat alone in a steel-backed chair. It wasn't the kind of chair you'd expect a man like Clint to sit in. Too modern, too sleek. A far cry from the rugged leather saddles and worn gunmetal resolve that had defined his cinematic career. Yet here he was, preparing for yet another promotional appearance. Clint's eyes weren't angry, not yet. They were focused on a small piece of paper in his hands, the edges slightly curled. It was the list, the topics to avoid. Politics. The 2012 RNC speech. Gun control. Civil rights protests. Voting history. The last item on the list caught his thumb. He hovered over it for a moment before pressing gently, as if testing the blade of a sword. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a warning. Maggie, his longtime aide, stood by with her arms crossed. She had been through this many times before, with 5 presidents, 2 marriages, and decades of Hollywood reinvention. Maggie knew Clint better than anyone. She knew when he was about to snap, when the pressure would cross a line and turn calm into chaos. And right now, the tension was building like the stillness before a wildfire sweeps through dry brush. "Don't push him," Maggie had warned the young producer earlier, her voice firm, a tone that made even the bravest staff members hesitate. They didn't listen, she muttered to herself, knowing that her warning had gone unheeded. This wasn't a man you could bait for a viral moment. This wasn't a stunt. From the hallway came the thump of the studio band rehearsing, the bass line carrying like a war drum. Maggie glanced down at her watch. 7 minutes until call. Clint folded the note slowly, precisely, like it was something sacred or cursed, then slipped it into his inner pocket. It wasn't a question in his mind. He knew what was coming. They were going to try something. "Yes, they are," Maggie replied, her voice low but steady. Across the hall, 2 producers argued in hushed voices. One was younger, eager for that viral moment. "It's gold," he insisted. "Throw in the chair clip. Instant gold." The older producer hesitated, but the younger one was relentless. "We need something big. This is what people want." Back in the green room, Clint rose, his movements slow, deliberate. The weight of decades of experience pressed down with every step. Maggie handed him a small paper cup of black coffee, which he sipped once before placing it untouched on the table. She watched him adjust his collar, pull his blazer tight. He wasn't angry, not yet. But there was a quiet determination in his eyes. A readiness that came from a lifetime of standing his ground. As the stage manager appeared, clipboard in hand, signaling that Clint was up next, Maggie knew the moment was near. "Just talk about the film," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If they poke, don't swing first." Clint looked at her. A faint trace of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. And then, without another word, he walked toward the stage. The green room had never felt so cold. The studio lights were blinding as Clint Eastwood stepped onto the stage, but the real heat came from the tension that followed him like a shadow. The audience roared in applause, excited to see the legend in person, but Clint's presence wasn't just about celebrity. His energy was a silent command, a reminder that he didn't need the limelight to be powerful. Jimmy Kimmel greeted him with his usual charm, but tonight, that charm felt like a weapon poised to strike. Clint settled into the chair across from Jimmy, his posture upright, his eyes steady. He wasn't here to play the game. He wasn't here for the usual back-and-forth banter. Tonight wasn't about movie promotions. It wasn't about easy laughs or viral clips. Clint Eastwood had seen it all, and he wasn't about to let anyone manipulate him or his narrative. "Clint," Jimmy began, his tone light, almost casual. "You've got a new movie out. A gritty western about a rancher fighting for his land. Pretty classic stuff, huh?" The audience chuckled, sensing the ease of the question, the typical Hollywood fluff. Clint nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Yeah. It's about standing your ground." His voice was calm, almost detached, but there was an edge beneath the surface. Jimmy, sensing the opportunity to engage, leaned in. "Standing your ground? Well, that sounds like something you've always done. Even back in 2012 at the RNC. That chair. You remember that, right?" A murmur rippled through the audience, a mixture of anticipation and discomfort. The chair, the moment that had made Clint a viral sensation, but also a divisive figure. Clint's jaw tightened imperceptibly, and his gaze shifted for just a second. It was a flicker, but it was enough. The tension in the studio thickened. Jimmy, sensing he had him, pushed further. A lot of people remember that speech. I mean, who could forget the empty chair? Clint didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He didn't offer the expected punchline. He simply looked at Jimmy, his eyes cold, calculated. "I wasn't talking to the chair," Clint said quietly, but his voice cut through the air like a blade. "I was talking to the void left behind by a broken system." The words hung in the air, uncomfortable in their simplicity. Jimmy attempted to laugh it off. "Well, that was a moment," he said, his smile tight. But Clint wasn't playing along. He wasn't giving Jimmy the satisfaction of a momentary distraction. Instead, Clint leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone. "The chair wasn't empty by accident," he said, his gaze locking with Jimmy's. "It was empty by design. Leadership stopped listening, Jimmy. The country stopped listening." The audience fell silent, their earlier energy evaporating into the weight of Clint's words. This wasn't a light-hearted moment. This wasn't about a politician or a meme. This was a man who had seen the flaws of the system, the games played behind closed doors, and he wasn't about to sugarcoat the truth for anyone. Jimmy's grin faltered, and for the first time in the interview, he was on the defensive. The scripted nature of the late-night talk show was beginning to unravel. Clint had already decided that he wasn't here to be a part of the spectacle. And now, Jimmy was realizing it. "I wasn't just talking to a chair," Clint continued, his voice steady, unwavering. "I was talking to the people who are ignored. The ones who get forgotten the minute the cameras leave. That chair wasn't empty. It was a mirror, and you'd better look in it." The weight of Clint's statement settled over the room. The audience, once unsure how to react, was now caught in the middle of a much larger conversation. One that Clint Eastwood had just ignited. Jimmy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was no longer in control. The game had changed. The studio was charged now, an electric tension that couldn't be ignored. Clint Eastwood, calm and composed, sat across from Jimmy Kimmel, but the playful banter that once defined the late-night show was now a distant memory. The crowd, once full of laughter and anticipation, now waited with bated breath, uncertain of what Clint would say next. Jimmy Kimmel, ever the professional, tried to regain control of the moment, his voice becoming slightly more nervous as he leaned into the conversation. "So, Clint," he began, attempting to shift the conversation, "let's talk about your new movie. It's about a rancher, a classic Western with grit. You've always had a way of connecting with that kind of character." But Clint wasn't taking the bait. He wasn't interested in the movie promotion. He had a point to make, and he wasn't going to let it get lost in trivial distractions. "It's about standing your ground," Clint replied, his voice steady and direct. "But it's more than just land. It's about principle. It's about what happens when people stop listening, when they stop caring about the real issues, and instead, they settle for the easy answers." The crowd's energy shifted again, as Clint's words carried more weight than any script or prepared question could ever hold. Jimmy, visibly uncomfortable, tried again to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. "Yeah, I get that. And you've always had a thing for themes like freedom, justice. Heck, you made your name as a gunslinger with Dirty Harry. But I'm curious, Clint, with everything going on these days, how do you see all that now?" Clint's eyes narrowed, and the moment of tension returned. This wasn't just about movies or politics. This was about freedom, the freedom to speak your truth, the freedom to stand by your beliefs, even when it wasn't comfortable. "Freedom," Clint said slowly, "isn't about what you carry. It's about knowing when you don't need to carry it." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and the audience was left to process them. Jimmy, realizing the shift in tone, attempted to ease the tension with a nervous laugh, but Clint wasn't done. "The real freedom comes when you don't need to prove it. The kind of freedom where you don't need a gun or a slogan. You just live it, and everyone knows it." But Clint wasn't through yet. The question about the infamous chair, the one that had made him a viral sensation, still hung between them like a ghost. And this time, Clint wasn't going to back down. Jimmy, ever the provocateur, took a deep breath and tossed the line. Clint, the chair speech. You remember it, don't you? At the RNC. You gave a speech to an empty chair. A lot of people saw it as, well, a joke. A bit of an embarrassing moment. What were you really trying to say there? Clint's gaze didn't waver. The memory of that speech, the infamous moment where he had gestured to an empty chair, had been memed, mocked, and dissected. But Clint wasn't interested in what others had made of it. He was interested in what it had meant. I wasn't talking to a chair, Clint responded, his voice low but clear. I was talking to the hollow space left by the absence of leadership. The chair wasn't empty by accident, it was empty by design. That's the problem. The space where real leadership should have been was vacant. Jimmy's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. But you knew it would stir things up. You knew it would cause a scene. Clint didn't flinch. Sometimes, the truth is uncomfortable. People don't like to face it. They'd rather fill the empty space with whatever fits their narrative. But the truth makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't need a punchline. It doesn't need a viral clip. It just is. The room fell silent. There was no applause, no laughter, just the heavy weight of Clint's words settling over the studio like a fog. Jimmy, once the master of controlling the moment, was now standing in Clint's shadow, the light from the studio cameras casting both of them in stark relief. Clint Eastwood had just drawn the line. And in that moment, it was clear, he wasn't here for the jokes. He wasn't here to be part of the media circus. He was here to remind the world of the truth they refused to see. The tension in the studio could be felt by everyone, but Clint Eastwood didn't break. His eyes locked on Jimmy Kimmel, steady and unwavering. This wasn't the easy, light-hearted banter Jimmy was used to. This wasn't about playing the crowd or pushing for viral moments. Clint had made it clear. He wasn't here to entertain. He was here to make a statement. Jimmy, now realizing that Clint wasn't going to be coaxed into a quick laugh or an easy moment, tried to steer the conversation into safer waters. I get it, Clint, he said, his voice a little tighter now. You've always had a point of view. You've never shied away from expressing it, but do you think, things have changed? The world has changed. Where does all that freedom talk fit into today's world? Clint didn't flinch, didn't even blink. His posture remained as unyielding as ever. Freedom isn't about being loud, Clint replied. It's about the ability to act without fear of being punished for. People talk about freedom, but most don't know what it costs. They don't know what it means to stand firm when the world tells you to sit down. The words hung heavy in the air. Jimmy, trying to regain his footing, pushed forward. But the way things are today, with protests in the streets and movements like Black Lives Matter, you can't just stay silent anymore, right? Clint's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, a flicker of something dangerous crossed his expression. Silence isn't the problem, Jimmy. It's the noise that's the problem. People are quick to shout, to wave signs, to hashtag their way into the spotlight. But how many of them are still standing when the cameras turn off? The ones who really stand up don't need to tweet about it. They don't need to put on a performance. They live it. They vote for it. They work for it. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Clint's words were not just challenging Jimmy. They were challenging the very foundations of modern activism, the performance-driven culture of outrage that had taken over social media and the public sphere. He wasn't denying the importance of protest, but he was demanding that people stop using it as a tool for self-promotion. Jimmy tried to reframe it. So, what you're saying is that protest and civil rights movements today, they're just noise? His voice was incredulous, but Clint's steady gaze silenced him. I'm not saying that, Clint said, his tone calm but firm. What I'm saying is that freedom and justice aren't something you wear like a costume. They're not hashtags or trendy slogans. They're earned every day, in the ways we live, in the choices we make, and in the battles we fight, even when no one's watching. The audience sat in stunned silence. Some had begun to lean forward, some in disbelief, others caught in the weight of Clint's words. This wasn't just a conversation about a movie or about the political climate. It was about integrity, about true freedom, and what it meant to live by your principles, even when the world wanted you to conform. Jimmy shifted in his seat, trying to mask the discomfort rising within him. I mean, that's pretty harsh, Clint. You're not saying that people who protest, who speak out, they're doing it wrong. Clint's answer came slow and deliberate. I'm saying the real battle is the one you fight when the cameras are off, when no one's looking. The real freedom is in knowing when to speak and when to listen. The room held its breath. Jimmy's usual charm was now replaced with an uneasy smile. Clint Eastwood had made his point, and it was clear, now more than ever, that the lines were drawn. The studio had never felt quieter. The initial awkwardness had given way to a more profound silence, the kind that lingers long after the words have been spoken. Clint Eastwood, unshaken, had just reshaped the entire conversation. He wasn't just promoting a film or entertaining the audience. He was holding up a mirror to the American public and daring them to look at what they had become. The cameras were still rolling, but Jimmy Kimmel's usual confidence had evaporated. He sat back, trying to maintain the appearance of control, but the weight of Clint's words had broken the facade. Clint wasn't just talking about politics. He was talking about the deep cracks in society, the self-righteousness of social media movements, the hollow noise of so-called progressivism, and the unsettling truth that many people had lost sight of what true freedom meant. The audience was split. Some nodded, some remained silent, and others looked at Clint with skepticism. His words were sharp, but there was a clarity to them that cut through the haze of entertainment and controversy. Jimmy cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of control. So, Clint, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying the people who marched, the ones who rallied in the streets for things like Black Lives Matter, they're just performing for the cameras? Is that it? Clint didn't blink. His eyes, steady and unflinching, remained fixed on Jimmy. Not at all, Clint replied, his voice as calm as ever. What I'm saying is, the real fight is the one you don't get credit for. It's the one you fight in silence, in the small, everyday moments that no one sees. You want to talk about freedom? True freedom isn't about being seen or heard. It's about the actions you take when no one's watching. It's about doing the right thing even when the world isn't looking for validation. A subtle tension grew in the room. The control room, usually buzzing with activity, had gone eerily still. The younger producers, who had hoped to cash in on a viral moment, were now nervously glancing at each other. The clip, the viral soundbite, the meme, they were all slipping away like sand through their fingers. The real story here wasn't Clint's political stances or his film. It was about a man who had spent a lifetime in the spotlight, refusing to be defined by it. He wasn't going to be boxed into a clip, no matter how popular it might be. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Clint Eastwood, the man who had become the embodiment of action and defiance, was now a symbol of the very thing the world claimed to fight for, truth in its most uncomfortable form. As the interview wore on, the tension didn't subside. The show limped to its closing segment. Jimmy Kimmel, with his usual grin strained, tried to navigate the rest of the conversation, but the audience wasn't as engaged as they had been. The room had shifted, and Jimmy was now just a host trying to manage the fallout of a conversation he hadn't prepared for. Clint, meanwhile, had said his piece. He wasn't there to push any agenda or make headlines. He was there to tell the truth, a truth that wasn't convenient, a truth that didn't care about what was trending or who was watching. The viral clip that had been expected to come out of this appearance wasn't the one anyone had anticipated. It wasn't the laugh or the playful jab at a forgotten political moment. It was a clip that would be dissected for days, weeks, and perhaps longer, because it wasn't just about Clint. It was about the truth no one wanted to hear. As the cameras cut, Clint stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. He wasn't walking away from a moment. He was walking away from a spectacle that had long since stopped being about anything real. The audience stood in divided applause, some in admiration, others still unsure what to make of the confrontation they had just witnessed. Behind him, the studio buzzed with the frantic energy of producers scrambling to control the narrative. But it was too late. Clint Eastwood had already won, and the moment would echo long after the lights dimmed.